Hi, I'm Teddy Abrams, and I'm the music director of the Louisville Orchestra and also the Brit Festival Orchestra in Southern Oregon. And I'm a proud Bay Area native and very, very thrilled to be here talking with you today about Beethoven, a subject matter that we've all been thinking about and hearing about a great deal. Even if it wasn't his 250th birthday, we'd still be pretty much thinking about Beethoven all the time, given his absolute dominance of classical music programming. Very well deserved, of course, but the great irony being that as the number one played composer, having a total Beethoven fest all year, as was planned before the pandemic, was going to be a lot, I think we could all recognize. I really wonder how many total complete Beethoven symphony cycles and string quartet cycles and piano sonata cycles there were going to be in this season. Probably in the thousands of each, which, there can never be too much Beethoven, so it's not a bad thing. But the pandemic situation has forced us to rethink everything, including how to celebrate Beethoven's birthday. And I can tell you I was originally planning to celebrate his birthday by performing the Missa Solemnis here in Louisville. We were going to do a big, massive super chorus version of it with probably several hundred members of the choir. It's something that Louisville has here that we're so lucky to have, which is an incredible choral scene. But of course that was canceled, naturally. So I thought about ways to celebrate Beethoven in perhaps a more reflective manner, rather than simply performing his works or doing a kind of survey of his life. I ended up choosing a little project for myself. I noticed some similarities between the late Beethoven sonatas, especially the slow themes that he used in his sets of variations, and the song Happy Birthday, which happened to have been composed here in Louisville. And so in absolute nerd fashion, I originally set out to recompose Happy Birthday in the style of late Beethoven, and it turned into a process of writing an entire set of variations on Happy Birthday in the style of the last three piano sonatas. And obviously, this was a more personal celebration of Beethoven. This wasn't such a public thing as a performance of the Ninth Symphony. But what it led is to kind of a rediscovery of forcing myself to contend with what makes Beethoven Beethoven and what makes him the composer that we love. And beyond that, of course, what are the specific elements of his music and characteristics of his compositional style that give his music its distinctive quality and its lasting quality. Because if you're going to write in the style of another composer, you have to kind of fully absorb their music and think like them. It's one thing if you're writing your own variations in your own style on somebody else's theme, which of course Beethoven did very frequently, especially as a younger man. But in this case, I was trying to actually emulate Beethoven's style, and that forced me to kind of reckon with these big questions of what exactly gives Beethoven the sound, maybe the distinctive qualities that make it completely recognizable and so loved. And it of course is something that is a little tough as an artist, because the magic of Beethoven is that you can't exactly distill the power of this music down into words. Obviously, that's the whole point of having music around in the first place. But trying to figure out some of the things that make his own compositional systems work and that give his music that very memorable quality, the thing that makes it so enduring, was a really fascinating task and a tough one. And a lot of it has been talked about, certain characteristics of Beethoven's writing. I think a lot of times people talk about his use of kind of melody or non-melody, being a non-melodic composer in certain senses. But I think it goes way deeper, because when I started to kind of explore down into the DNA of Beethoven's works, from his earliest piano music to his most massive compositions, his late symphonies and the big piano sonatas at the end of his life, you start to see all kinds of fascinating contrapuntal alignment and specific gestures and ways of approaching a certain kind of I don't know if they're a combination of techniques or just sounds that obviously Beethoven found resonant to himself that fill out his entire body of work. And trying to kind of interpolate that and distill that down into the Beethoven essence of what makes Beethoven the individual and the distinctive character where you hear his music and instantly feel his voice speaking to you was a really incredible task. And as I said, it was a more intrinsic, reflective way of thinking about Beethoven. And I remember going way back in my own life. As you can probably tell, this is not going to be the typical Beethoven biographical overview, but we are going to do some analysis here. But going back in my own life, I remember listening to the Beethoven Lives Upstairs program over and over and over again, and there were certain pieces or certain little turns of phrase in Beethoven's music, in particular the pieces that I hadn't heard before, that stuck with me so deeply. And one of them I just have right here because I think it's a great little example. The relatively early work, the Rondo alla Inharese, the Rage Over the Lost Penny, as it's often called, but. Just that little bit right there offers such an amazing window into things that Beethoven loved to do. I mean, this is not the most serious, earth-shattering composition ever, but first of all, the motor right there of the left hand is something that factors into so many Beethoven compositions. This is from somewhere in between 1795 and 1798, so it's relatively vintage Beethoven. But that motor right there, whether it's in the Waldstein Sonata or in the Eighth Symphony, is just a core Beethoven characteristic. And of course, you could rightfully say, well, I mean, any composer could do that. That doesn't necessarily distinguish Beethoven from anybody else. But we're not trying to say what set Beethoven apart from every other composer. We're trying to determine what Beethoven's kind of go-to systems were for creating the music that identifies him, the music that is distinctive of his own personality. And we're going to find a whole bunch of other ones just in this little bit of music right here. We talked about very briefly that idea of melody, and certainly in the sense of kind of bel canto, Italian operatic aria melodies or Tchaikovsky lush romanticized melodies. That's not really where Beethoven shines. It's not the kind of tunes that he writes. But why is it that if it's not necessarily the melody in the kind of maybe traditional vocal sense, the music has this kind of singability or desire to, maybe it's just pure vocalization or humming that you produce, but it sticks with you so deeply. It's not just the power of one gesture or the power of an awesome turn of phrase, but whether it's a melody or not, the way he constructs the kind of tune-ish elements of his music has that lasting staying power that obviously made Beethoven Beethoven. And I think one thing that's been discussed at length is that sense of building parts of chords and using those as almost like Lego blocks to create your kind of a tune equivalent. So it's not a typical aria melody, but this. Obviously an arpeggio, but that breaking down of just a G major chord and totally exploiting just the simplest of elements within that chord is a total Beethoven hallmark. It's something that you find constantly. Obviously, even the Fifth Symphony is built on that same concept. But right here you find it in its kind of simple essence. Next you have the funky little things in bars 3 and 4. They're not full-blown trills, but we know that the trill was one of Beethoven's go-to gestures. One of the things that I love most about Beethoven, I discovered later on, was that Beethoven was one of the greatest improvisers of his time. And Beethoven frequently engaged in improvisation contests. This is an art form that doesn't really exist so much within the classical space, but obviously transferred later on to many other parts of musical work. And improvisation was always something that I loved dearly as a musician. And growing up, people would not necessarily encourage me to pursue the art of improvisation because it was seen as divergent from the path of learning piano properly. But when I learned later on that Beethoven was an incredible improviser and spent a great deal of his time, especially early on when he came to Vienna, improvising for people and competing with other improvisers, it totally blew me away and opened my ideas about how Beethoven may have constructed his music. And one of my favorite stories, and we can get to this later, but is the famous story of Beethoven and Steibelt competing in an improvisation contest. And we know that they had this famous improv off, as you might say, and Steibelt had his tremolos, and Beethoven had his trills. And we know that they competed, and Steibelt nearly won until Beethoven threw a total fit and took one of Steibelt's compositions that was on a music stand, turned it upside down, and played the theme to the Third Symphony, Last Movement. And we know that he wrote many sets of variations on it. That was the music that he turned upside down, according to the legend. But the point is that the trill was something that Beethoven kind of used. It was like his, particular boxing move that he would do that was his signature style. And of course, double trills factor into much of his later music. And anybody that's tried to play the Hammerklavier Sonata and failed or possibly succeeded, if it's possible, knows just how devilish and kind of upsetting Beethoven's use of the trill can actually be. But what you hear in this little bit of the rondo is his introduction of that trill-ish gesture right into what should otherwise be the tune. And I think that those two elements right there, the very basic, kind of obvious thing of just building a chord, a G major chord, and then suddenly throwing a little jab of a trill at you, and not just a kind of, not just a decorative trill, it's not, but it's, especially with that D7 chord with the G in the bass right there, it's in your face. And I think that while you can't say, we've figured it out now, like some kind of vaccine development, we now can distill it right down and give people a shot of Beethoven. That's not possible, but you can start to identify some of these key characteristics in the pieces that last for us. And that's what I'm really interested in doing, because as a conductor, my job is to conduct a lot of Beethoven, which I love doing. I can absolutely say that there are pieces of Beethoven that I've been doing for nearly my entire life. I've been conducting the Seventh Symphony since I was 10 years old, I think. I've never gotten tired of conducting Beethoven. It's never the kind of thing where I feel like it's going to be hard to find the inspiration and excitement to conduct that music. But, and this is a significant but, when you're a conductor working with lots of different orchestras, it is your responsibility to inspire the players who have obviously compounded and just absolutely incomprehensible number of total hours of playing any given Beethoven work, and to find a way to both respect the elements of Beethoven's style that are loved, I say that very politically, but also bring something new to the table and make people feel like it's fresh. That is a challenge. That's a real challenge, and it's my job, I feel, to do exactly what I did with the Beethoven Happy Birthday variations, which is delve deeply enough into this music so that you're actually able to figure out kind of what those elements are that give it the voice and give it the soul that we know has made Beethoven truly universal. So that's kind of what I'm doing right here. This is an extremely basic form of that analysis, because if this was an orchestral piece, I might tell the orchestra, for instance, all right, we're gonna really create an articulate biting kind of motor here on the left hand. That really driving sound, almost kind of John Adams style. I might say, there's just ways of describing things to get people excited, especially in an early morning rehearsal on a piece that's been played 7,000 times before. And I'll say, psych them out with the most basic, innocuous little tune here. Just a little bit of staccato, a little bit of lightness, and then punch bars 3 and 4, because we know that that's that little Beethoven calling card. The simplicity of the rising arpeggio, the punch of the trill, the trill, you might call it. So give it an accent, give it a distinctive kind of, shot quality, and then go back as if nothing happened in bar 5. So you might in fact get... Anyway, just a little example of what I'm trying to do in my process of interpreting this music. So I'd like to jump around to a few different works of Beethoven just to kind of pull back some of the curtains on this music, and in an analytical way without overanalyzing and taking the magic away. I think it's really a wonderful opportunity to kind of delve into what makes this music not only great, but lasting. And don't groan, but I actually pulled up here Für Elise. And the only reason I'm thinking about this, because this is obviously a Pachelbel canon kind of situation here, where you kind of don't ever play it again after a certain point unless it's requested of you. I actually had it requested of me recently after probably not playing it for 20 years, and I was just, I know this sounds silly, but kind of blown away by this music. And of course everyone knows it's great, but I was thinking to myself, why is this so good? It was really bothering me, because to try and figure out the answer to that, as I said, I'm not entirely sure that there's anything that can take it apart. It's like some subatomic particle of greatness. But on the other hand, when you start looking at it for its characteristics, it's, if you're thinking about your particle physics here and looking at it from some maybe strange different angle and measurement, you can in fact start to maybe distill a few things that might give us some insights into it. Once again, I was struck by both the simplicity and the specificity of the Beethoven-ness in this music. The unbelievable, just obvious arpeggiation. The tune is an arpeggio. That's really part of the tune. You can't take out the bottom part when you're analyzing this. That's what's so fascinating about this. It's not just... That's not some hidden melodic element. The whole piece of music is its own tunefulness, you might say. You cannot remove that arpeggio from the mix. So between that simplicity that's very similar to what we just explored in the rondo, you also have this distinctiveness and kind of oddness of the opening. The lack of knowing where the rhythm is, or I guess you could say where the meter is. I think every young pianist, and this is something we take for granted, and as a conductor, again, it's my job to often conduct super famous pieces and think about super well-known pieces, but find something new. We've kind of blocked from our minds the fact that as a young person, when we hear this music, I'm assuming many of you can read music, we all think of this as 1, 2, 3, 4, There is, no obvious way to understand from the first hearing, and several subsequent hearings, I would imagine, that this is an upbeat to the first beat, 1, 2, 3, 1. Especially because Beethoven's doing a kind of, classic playing with the meter to begin with in the second bar. That it's not just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, one could claim that this is just Beethoven's way of writing the fingerings, that there's nothing distinctive about the fact that he writes these in 2 groups of 3 notes. But I think it's all part of it. I think Beethoven's notation is incredibly specific, incredibly thought through, and even when it's kind of odd and tough to decipher, you certainly get that with his late music, because it's not always clear that what he's writing, even in its specificity, is precisely what he was hearing. But that's an issue for another day, or at least another part of the talk. But these elements of where the beams go, how he's using notation of rests, where he's actually putting in certain groupings of notes, gives you a real insight to what makes this music powerful, what makes it eternal. And I think there is something fascinating about that element of not knowing where the beat is in the beginning, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Whatever it would be, which is suggested, there's something fascinating about that messed up kind of first bar, and then this playing with groups of 2s and 3s. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's constantly been that way. And then I think this gives you an opportunity to find something really interesting in the music and to make it distinctive in just a little bit in terms of how you might analyze this for your actual performance. But the other Beethoven characteristic that's in here, as I said, not only the weirdness of the meter and rhythmic elements of where he's psyching you out with 4s, but also that lower neighbor right there is a very, very, very important part of Beethoven's kind of motivic writing. It's a trill. It's a slowed down trill, but it's basically a trill. And you find this all over the place in Beethoven's music. I know lots of other composers do this too, but this is a Beethoven hallmark right here. And just in case you're groaning too much over the choice of the Für Elise, I have Für Elise's companion piece, as I like to call it, from the second movement of the, what number sonata is it? I always forget what number this is. 17, the Opus 31 number 2 sonata, which this is kind of like the Für Elise cousin. It's been the same way where you're constantly confused. He makes it a little bit clear because you have it's not so hard to tell where the downbeat is in this one, which maybe makes Für Elise even a little more bizarre and interesting there. But this element of, is it like or is it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? That's not totally clarified in this music until a little bit later. And as I said, that element of trills and neighbor tones is so important, of course, in the movement that I was just playing from the sonata. You get this. And then later, it really could almost be some kind of weird, like, Für Elise stand-in right there. You could go straight into obviously not, but you can just see that the elements that make Beethoven can be clarified right here. Maybe we are kind of extracting DNA and you're getting little strands of it. But the other thing is the actual, in Für Elise, the actual wording of that first bar. Clearly, he's just outlining an A minor chord, which is, if you break it down harmonically, just going to 5 and then back to 1. And I start to draw these connections. I'm trying to figure out, where are the strands that I can follow through here in Beethoven. I'm thinking of other famous A minor pieces by Beethoven. Obviously a little bit different, but I think even though the music sounds totally different, maybe the affect is different, the systems that make it work, that same kind of distinctive harmonic, elements are at play. Immediately going to C major, and then of course I think the thing that if there was something that made this piece different enough, strange enough, earwormy enough, it's this bar right here. That process of losing itself, this odd kind of, octave dance right there, and then the very specific way that he is instructing you to play left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, get lost, find your way. That is something you can't get out of your head. That, what was set up to be a very simple piece in the hands of virtually anybody else, you could have just had something simple like that, and you would never have gotten the strangeness of the rhythm. You would never have gotten the fascinating kind of breakdown of the twos and threes, and you certainly would have never gotten this standout element, the losing of its way within a trill context, finding its way back to utter simplicity. And even right here, he's so clear to beam it so that you have 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then for the first time you get a very, very clear pattern of just typical kind of tune like 3/8. So in other words, if you were still messing with yourself just to give it some rhythmic texture, I kind of think it's like cutting hair a little bit, where you texturize the hair with the rhythm. So no, you're not actually playing, but feeling that inner pull between 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, gives it that texture that makes it a lot more interesting than simply playing bar to bar. Then, for the first time, we have the typical, just the very basic kind of accompanimental part in the left hand. Very obvious, much more typical. Anyway, we're not going to dwell on Für Elise forever, but I think in there you can find so many kind of proto-Beethoven, Beethoven moments that give us an insight into what Beethoven's compositional systems were. I had mentioned improvisation, and nothing calls out improv like the beginning of the Emperor Piano Concerto. This right here actually is a perfect little example of the things we were just talking about. The most basic arpeggios that are built, because I think anybody can say that as tuneful as... That's an awesome tune, very famous, everyone loves it, but the opening of this concerto, the opening of Beethoven's Emperor Piano Concerto, is just, it's such a statement. More of a statement than the actual main theme. The way this begins with this improvisational kind of setup for the piano is extraordinary. And it's got all of Beethoven's favorite things. It's got the arpeggiation, and it's got trills, 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 and more trills. But there's just something extraordinary about the statement that this makes. And, I think maybe it's easy to, look back at things that we really love and are deeply embedded within our kind of own, musical histories, our own musical stories, you might say, things that we've come to love and they're a part of our lives, and then start saying that they're great later on. But I think strip all of that away, strip all of our personal cares for this music, and just take it for what it is. And bringing in the orchestra, Beethoven knew how to write an E-flat major chord. I think we can safely say that. E-flat major was Beethoven's power chord, as power key. And I think you can safely say whether it's the opening of the Third Symphony or the opening of the Emperor Concerto, it just doesn't get much more powerful than this, given the instrumental constraints of Beethoven's writing. But just going all in, that kind of remarkable open orchestration. And then this was certainly from an improvisatory place. This is as crafted and perfectly, beautifully constructed as it is right now. This music comes from the act of a composer sitting down at a piano and making something up and feeling like, okay, I've got my E-flat major piece, and we're going to have the orchestra started off almost like it was a big, overture of some kind. I'm sure there's a little Mozartian influence right here. If you were to take out the piano improvs, that's what you get, right? You just have kind of overture. That would actually be a viable, very poorly done opening. But instead, to give you this open sound and then just say, let it rip. Trills, 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 trills. I'm playing more trills and more trills. It's remarkable. I mean, what a sound. What a sound. You get the double trills right here. This is Beethoven's power move. Again, this is his rope-a-dope right there, as you might say. It's a distinctive sound. Nobody did this. That's pure Beethoven right there. The other thing about it that's so interesting, I know you can't see this if I show you the music, but this is probably totally meaningless to you, but you could look it up. If you haven't seen it before, this is a distinctive example of Beethoven's kind of free writing. And even Sibelius software struggles with this to this day, of how do you write totally free music. There are no bar lines in the beginning, not until you get the big A-flat major chord. So this is all written out in a very free way. You have 4 16th notes, then a triplet, which should take the space of an 8th note, then a quintuplet, which takes the place of a beat. So it's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 7. You have a septuplet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then your trill sections, which are written out in groups of 4. This may sound totally bizarre the way I'm describing it, because when you play it, it doesn't sound like that at all. But again, there's something going on rhythmically here, and you get this in his later music. I'm thinking in particular of the Opus 109 Piano Sonata. We're going to get to that in a second, but that's another piece where he's so specific with how he wants the improvisations to be played, and I think that's probably a reflection of Beethoven's own piano performance of this. This was not just, kind of throw it together. People will know what to do. It's not that anybody can do that. But there's something in here where he writes them out with these beamings and these numbers that must be an insight into the way that he improvised. He must have gone... There must be something in there that gives us a picture into the way Beethoven approached the piano when it was free form. Because we know that was one of the things that he loved to do and was incredibly proficient at it. So that opening right there, the next one is a little bit different. By the way, if you're not a pianist that's played this thing before, it's interesting to look and see how it changes, because this time he uses the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, except he elides them. The last note is the start of the group of 3 in the right hand. Sounds like I'm playing the under the C, but it's not, obviously in context doesn't sound so stupid. Double trills right there. Anyway, what's so remarkable about this is that I feel like when you play this music and you try and figure out what's going on here and why it's written in this distinctive way, this is the closest you get to feeling like Beethoven the man. So much of the greatness of his music has that universal human quality, that humanist side of Beethoven. When you're conducting the Ninth Symphony or playing the Ninth Symphony, or you're interpreting the Opus 111 Sonata, there's this kind of universalist, humanist element to Beethoven. But when I'm playing this, I feel like it's Beethoven the person. It's almost like he was a great jazz improviser and he just happened to be kind enough to write out his own improvisation for us to actually interpret ourselves. And the beauty is that we get to make it our own. There are a million ways to play that opening right there. I mean, I could show you a gazillion ways right now. That's one of my favorite things to do when I play this piece, to actually do it a different way every single time, to reshape and sometimes start things slower and move them faster, and then do the opposite the next time, just to keep your kind of improvisational interpretive chops going. But it feels like you're connecting with Beethoven the man. And one of the problems with Beethoven and the way he's taught and discussed is that you don't get to experience Beethoven the man on a one-to-one basis so much. I won't hide from you that when I was growing up, I had, I guess, kind of a, probably this is ultra nerdy, kind of personal savior relationship with certain composers like Beethoven and Mozart. I felt very close to them, and on a personal basis, and that was before anybody told me, they were so high and mighty that you can't touch anything that they've done. And I try and get back to what that feeling was as one musician to another, not telling everybody that these are the musical gods. This is the musical pantheon, and you're so small that you couldn't even dream of reaching up to the tops of Olympus. You'll be struck down should you even think that way. I don't think that's a healthy way to consider this music and to consider Beethoven as an artist, and that's why passages like that I just played are so special and important, because they give us that window directly into the humanity of the composer himself in this case. It was very hard to choose pieces of music to talk about in this discussion, because there are just so many unbelievable works. Obviously, this is very hard to talk about any one piece. You could go on and on and on. I mean, we could spend hours just continuing to analyze Für Elise, of course. But one piece that I felt was really special, and a piece that, as I said, I've been conducting for a long time, and that I've spent a great deal of time analyzing and thinking about, is Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And certainly that second movement deserves its place as one of the great powerful emotional works in the repertoire, even though there's a wide range of ways to interpret that. You have everybody from your, mid-20th century funeral versions to your sprightly kind of dance-like, historically informed versions. But just starting at the beginning of the symphony, this is one that, for me, combines the obviousness of why Beethoven's great with the eternal struggle of trying to figure out who this man and what these compositions are. That duality of, it's quite clearly from the beginning attractive, awesome, something that you love to listen to. It's enduring from the first listen, and at the same time, it's a lifelong, never-ending journey of continuing to develop a relationship with it. That duality right there is so perfectly encapsulated in this work. There are moments where, maybe in Beethoven's early music, the simplicity and the struggle of Beethoven trying to kind of, control his compositional process are maybe weighted on that side. And there are also pieces that I feel later in his life that are sometimes so obscure that the struggle outweighs sometimes the outward enjoyability of listening to the music. And I say that with all due respect. I think that's what we'd expect of any searching artist. To write more obvious music, to write Wellington's Victory, which is a perfect example. I love Wellington's Victory. It's a totally obvious piece. It's not one that is going to be a lifelong struggle trying to understand. If you're not familiar with Wellington's Victory, there's a reason I mentioned it, because it was played on the same concert where the Seventh Symphony was premiered. It's an absolutely ridiculous, totally over-the-top, bonkers, silly composition, and it was his number one hit in his lifetime, if you can believe that. This absolutely absurd depiction of a battle in just neon colors, I guess you could say. But then you also have some of the late string quartets and the grosse fuga that are eternal struggles. They're not easy listening. So Beethoven's Seventh Symphony combines those two things in maybe the perfect balance, I think. It is a compact, brilliantly conceived piece of music where the counterpoint is strong with this one, you can say. And I'm a huge Schenkerian guy and a big believer in the power and ultimate meaning of counterpoint above all else. Everything else is kind of just a kind of splintering off of the core, contrapuntal spiritual system, as Schenker would probably say, that I think makes music work. And this is a perfect example. But it starts at the beginning of the piece before the music even plays. It's the tempo of Poco sostenuto, my favorite Beethoven tempo, Poco sostenuto. It's totally unhelpful. But he does give helpful if you analyze and think about it, but not helpful to figure out what the actual speed of the music is. But he gives you a metronome mark, quarter note equals 69. Just like the Emperor Concerto with its distinctive big orchestral chords followed by something, Beethoven does the same thing. In this case, an A major. And in the hands of a composer, maybe 20 years Beethoven's senior, that would probably be a perfectly valid way to start a piece. Whatever. That could be a great little introduction. But the genius is that after playing some bombastic A major chord, you're left with just one oboe playing by itself. This is so obvious to us because we've heard this music so many times, but this is really something to consider. Like the weirdness of the rhythm in the Für Elise opening, this is really something. That's a thing to state. To play a bombastic A major chord and have one lonely oboe just outlining, yes, an arpeggio, an A major arpeggio. One thing we didn't talk about, but I wish we had, because it's in both Für Elise and the rondo and every piece of Beethoven. These kind of upper neighbors, they're related to the trills. You get it in the Sixth Symphony, you get it all over the place, but this kind of upper neighbor falling down, this appoggiatura is so important to Beethoven. It's rather than going full out vocal. This is not a tune in the traditional sense. It's not an operatic aria. Rather than going full out vocal, you get just the gesture of this appoggiatura, which is kind of a pleading a gesture. It kind of, you might imagine a soprano aria, you're very Italian it right there. But Beethoven distills the gesture down. He doesn't give you any more than that. There's not a typical tune here. But listen, okay, so you got this bad chord, one oboe playing, then the strings very lightly. And this is a classic thing. It happens in the beginning of the Emperor Concerto too. Not the whole chord, just two notes of the chord. There's no E in there. It's very kind of thin, uncertain A major. You hear that right there? That F sharp, that's that sighing appoggiatura, neighbor tone. Then it goes down to the next big chord. The oboe holds and the clarinet joins on the same note. Actually, two clarinets, most people don't know that. Going down in another outline of, this time, E major. And that opening sense of appository now really comes back in full force. And that's so remarkable right there. I know we're so used to this music, but it's really important right there. The clarinet going down, then the oboe going. The clarinet leaps up, almost like a little, Bernstein. And now Beethoven's setting us up for something because, we started in A major and now we've got into this E with that D. And now we're going to start to get those dominant seventh chords right there. Then the horn plays the same thing that the clarinet plays. Just as outline right there. And the flute then plays it with just a little modification. Instead of going down to the lay, just goes back up. And with a little figuration now. Now we're in D major right here. And this is one of my favorite things. Instead of the strings just playing that simple little 4-beat hold, now they gently give us the chords. While the bassoon now has the outline. So all together you get one of my favorite things of all time here is this very distinctive A that the horns play on beat 2. So within the first couple of seconds of this piece of music, we've gone from our home of A major down to F major, which is not a typical place to be so early on in a symphony, but the horns bring it home by reminding us, get back to A, or something close to it. All we have are scales and arpeggios. If I said sing this, what would you sing? It's contrapuntal music right here. There's the clarinet and the oboe at the same time. There's the horn and the clarinet. There's the rising flute. There's the chords. There's not something totally singable. There's nothing singable here. What it feels like is that same improviser. Obviously now very thought out, tightly configured way, just creating the scales and arpeggios that he used to build his distinctive improvisations. It has that same quality. It's that Beethoven, the improvisatory genius, but this is what happens when it's filtered through Beethoven, the analytical superstar mind, and it comes out like this. Now, I could go on and on and on with this. As I said, one of my favorite compositions. But the way this transitions, and there's a little bit of that element of Für Elise in this too, in the way he goes from the end of the introduction getting lost in E's. Does this ring a bell? I'm speeding it up for time's sake. You're kind of lost. What's going to happen now? Arpeggio starting right here. And notice one other thing. This is just a little side note. that's another calling card of Beethoven. The Beethoven 5 gesture right there. Right? The string quartet, classic Beethoven, whether it's actually one da-da-da-da or da-da-da-bum, 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 classic Beethoven rhythmic gesture. It's not distinct to the Fifth Symphony. In fact, the Sixth Symphony begins the same way. Right? If you take that little bit out, same rhythmic gesture. Anyway, we could go on and on and on with this. But I want to get to finally late Beethoven piano sonatas. And again, you could spend hours analyzing any one of these things. But for me, the Opus 109 sonata and 110 and 111, the three late sonatas, they're all masterpieces. But the Opus 109 really resonates with me because it gets back to Beethoven, the improvisational genius, Beethoven, the pianist working things out and giving us that insight into what it must have been like in his own hands to work that out, but also the master craftsman, the master of distilling down the essence of music's most basic building blocks, but doing it in a way that never leaves your heart. I get almost a little emotional thinking about it because this opening of the 109 piano sonata is the most simple music. It's, again, just a bunch of arpeggios. Just a bunch of chords. You can't sing it. It's not a single thing. It's not, if you were to try and distill down the quote-unquote melody, it's not da-dee, 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 dee-dee. That's childish. That's not at all what's going on here. The music is composite of all of these elements. It's got classic elements of Beethoven trying to give you little clues, where the first note is a quarter note. It's meant to be longer than all the other notes. The second note is held. It's a dotted eighth note. It's meant to be held to the end of the beat. So if the beat is 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. See, the first note holds all the way between the beats, so it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And the second note is held 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. The left hand, on the other hand, is not held at all. They're just 2 16th notes, meaning they disappear. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And you might say, well, that he was just writing quickly. I don't believe that for a second. And there is a little clue here. There's one moment where the voice is split apart just for a split second, and that's it, a couple bars into the piece. You actually get quarter notes, and then so it's as if it's two things. It's that melody, and it's also that single note at the same time. So it's these right here, you can tell he splits them apart. The quarter note goes here, and the bottom goes in the bottom. I don't know why I'm playing it with my hands like this. It looks bizarre, but now that's the only way I know how to do it. So split apart. You don't hold that first note. You don't go. You go. So 1, 2. The other thing is, there's a rhythmic messiness to this too, or I guess a metrical messiness, you should say, not rhythmic. What beat does this start on? You've heard me count it off several times now, going 1, 2, 1, 2. It's not 1, 2, 1, 2. It's 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Like that Chaka Khan tune where you can't figure out what eighth note it starts on. It drives me insane. This is the same. There's no way to know. How would you know? Maybe knowing is not really the point. But knowing for the interpreter is the point. Because it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, So there is so much to do here. This is why I love this music. Because it's outwardly likable. I mean, it has a Pachelbel canon-like likability to it. But there's just endless work to do in trying to figure out how to play this music that brings all the little teeny bits alive. This is like, getting to perform Ulysses or something like that. There is so much to think about and consider, but it doesn't take away from the lovability of the music at all. So, I get into it, but I'm going to try my best just to play the first part, with all the spirit of the analysis here. One of my favorite things in all of Beethoven's music is what comes next. I mean, obviously the music has been building towards something because the chords get a little more intense. Okay, something's going to happen, right? Maybe not, but probably given that chord right there. That's kind of what you'd expect. That's what a non-late Beethoven composer might do. But to go, we call this the 5 of 5 because here's our 1, right? Then the 5. Then the 5 of that 5 is here. And you think Beethoven's just setting us up for this. But one of the great gestures in Beethoven's entire work, we're going from here to here. There is so much to unpack. Built just of arpeggios and little oscillations of tone. It's almost like you're lost in kind of the ether or something like that. And Beethoven's this kind of protean god pulling raw elements of music out, like this rawness of that, and a scale then forces the scale to come down, then go back out in perfect kind of mirror image. One of the really exceptional things. This note here is so weird, but can also only go one way. It has to pull upwards. And how beautiful is that right there? I mean, we know Beethoven was a master of dissonance, whether it was or whatever it is in the Third Symphony, or this right here. And then finding its way immediately back to a place of comfort. And just the sense, the little hint of that comfort of tune. Before going back into raw creator mode, as I call it. And right there, again, he's very specific with the way he wants that played. That's not like Chopin, where it's just play 11 notes and figure out your way to the downbeat. That was Chopin. This one is very clear. If you follow the left hand, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's amazingly clear as to how he wants that to be played. Yet at the same time, the interpretive options are still unlimited. That is the mark of genius right here. And this whole piece is just a study in nostalgia, not in a bad sense or in a trite or superficial sense, but like a nostalgia for a person that I never knew, and none of us obviously ever knew, but we feel like we have a genuine, meaningful, loving relationship with through the power of this music. I know this is kind of a different way of giving an insight into Beethoven and thinking about it, but that work that we've just done together here is a little bit of a taste. It's the tip of the iceberg for what I think a creative artist, and in particular, somebody who has a leadership role with an orchestra, has to do in order to not only to do your job really well as an interpreter of this music, but also to do right by it as the people that will be responsible for sharing this music with hopefully countless generations moving forward. Because the life that we find inside of this music, the eternal elements of the basics of musical building blocks, but also the overwhelming human emotional resonance that Beethoven is somehow balancing and somehow bringing together. That's for everyone. That's as Beethoven would say in the lyrics of the Ninth Symphony, although he didn't write them. But that's a gift to all mankind. That's a gift to all humankind. This kiss for the whole world. And I feel like that's maybe, if ever there was something that Beethoven gave to us, it's that sense of having given the world something that is eternal. And that's what we should be celebrating here at Beethoven's 250th birthday. Not just going through the motions of playing more and more Beethoven, but of taking a moment to reflect on how a human being can give of themselves so much that it can mean something across all barriers and across time. So I hope you've enjoyed this little deep dive into the mind and the music of Beethoven, and it has been such a pleasure to speak with you today. Have a wonderful, safe, healthy New Year and 2021. May it be far better than 2020. And happy Beethoven's birthday to all of you.